Oh, yeah, diving into the origins of patriarchy, trying to unravel whether it's always been here or if there was a time before it ruled the roost.
So we're on this quest to figure out, did dudes always run the show, or was there ever a world where things were, a bit more balanced?
Well, to kick things off, we're diving into this fascinating video by Beetlevine Learning. It really makes you rethink those assumptions we often take for granted.
Right. Like, it's easy to assume the way things are now is just, well, the way they've always been.
Exactly. And this video starts by throwing us right into the lion's den with the traditionalist view on why patriarchy reigns supreme.
Okay, hit us with what's the old school explanation for this whole shebang?
All right. So in a nutshell, they chalk it up to biology, good old-fashioned nature.
The classic men are from Mars, women are from Venus argument.
Pretty much. They say men, being physically stronger, were naturally suited to be the hunters, the protectors.
And women, being the childbearers, were better suited for, keeping the cave tidy and nurturing those mini-humans.
You got it. It's a pretty neat and tidy explanation, right? Except, well, it kind of falls apart when you start digging deeper.
And I'm guessing this is where our hunter-gatherer ancestors enter the chat.
Bingo. See, the traditionalist view hinges on the idea that hunting was the way to bring home the Brontosaurus bacon.
Makes sense. Got to secure those prehistoric protein bars, right?
Right. But research on hunter-gatherer societies paints a different picture. Turns out, gathering, which was often done by women, was actually the more consistent food source.
Hold on. So you're telling me those berries and roots were more valuable than a giant slab of mammoth meat?
In terms of consistent sustenance, absolutely. Those mammoth hunts, as epic as they might have been, weren't exactly a weekly occurrence. Gathering provided a reliable food supply, which, let's face it, is kind of important for survival.
Okay, I can see that. A steady supply of berries trumps an occasional mammoth feast, when you put it that way. But so this overturns the idea that men were solely responsible for providing for the family.
It definitely challenges that assumption. And it's not just ancient history either. Even today, we have living examples that throw a wrench in the whole biology is destiny argument.
Give us some modern-day evidence that flips the script.
Well, think about some of the tribal societies around the world, many with roots going way back to those hunter-gatherer days.
Okay, picturing it.
In a lot of these societies, gender equality isn't some far-off dream. It's a living reality. You've got women in positions of power making key decisions for their communities.
Wow, so not exactly the patriarchal picture we're used to seeing.
Not even close. And that's what makes this whole exploration so fascinating. If biology alone doesn't dictate patriarchy, then what does?
That is the million-dollar question, isn't it? And luckily for us, this Beetlevine Learning video dives into some possible answers.
It sure does, and they introduce us to a pretty influential figure in this whole debate, Friedrich Engels.
Now, for those of us who might not be familiar, who exactly is this Friedrich Engels character?
So Engels was this German philosopher and all-around revolutionary thinker back in the 19th century. He was like the OG disruptor, challenging the norms of his time. In 1884, he wrote this pretty groundbreaking book called The Origin of the Family, Private Property, and the State, where he tackles this very question.
The origin of the family, private property, and the state. Talk about a mouthful. So what's the gist of his theory?
Well, he had this idea that human development has gone through three major stages: savagery, barbarism, and civilization.
Savagery to civilization sounds like my average week. But seriously, walk us through these stages. How did Engels see gender roles playing out in each?
Okay, so according to Engels, back in the savagery stage, things were pretty different. He called this period primitive socialism, and believe it or not, he argued there were no class distinctions or gender hierarchies. Everyone was essentially on a level playing field.
Wow, a true classless society. Sign me up. But was it all sunshine and roses? How did things shift from this egalitarian utopia to, well, the patriarchy we know, and love to question?
That, my friend, is the million-dollar question, and luckily for us, that's where we'll pick up in part 2 of our deep dive.
You heard it here first, folks. Make sure you're subscribed and ready for part 2 because we're just getting started. This is the deep dive, and trust us, it's about to get even deeper.
So last time we left off, we were talking about Engels' big idea of primitive socialism.
Right. This whole concept that back in the day, things were surprisingly chill in terms of gender roles. No class distinctions, no patriarchy in sight.
Right. Everyone's sharing, everyone's equal, a real Stone Age love-in.
Sounds idyllic, but we all know that couldn't last forever, right? So how do we go from kumbaya around the campfire to, well, the society we have today.
Well, according to Engels, a major turning point comes with, drumroll please, the development of agriculture and animal husbandry.
So we're trading in our spears for plows and, I guess, cattle prods.
Pretty much. And Engels argues that this shift from hunting and gathering to settled agriculture wasn't just about a change in diet.
Right, you gotta imagine it shook things up more than just swapping out mammoth steaks for sweet potatoes.
Exactly. This new way of life came with a whole new set of values.
Like what? Give me the lowdown.
Well, think about it. With agriculture comes the idea of land ownership.
Makes sense. You gotta protect your precious crops, right?
Right. And then comes the idea of surplus, of having more than you need, which leads to, you guessed it, accumulation of wealth.
The good old he who dies with the most toys wins mentality starts to creep in.
Exactly. And here's where things get really interesting, according to Engels.
Hit me with it. I'm ready for the plot twist.
So as men are figuring out this whole agriculture thing, they're also starting to understand their role in reproduction.
Wait, you mean like the birds and the bees?
Exactly. They're realizing, hey, I'm not just a provider, I'm a baby maker too.
Okay, so picture this. You're a dude in the Stone Age. You've got your fields of grain, your little hut, maybe a couple of goats.
Living the good life.
Right. And suddenly it hits you. All this stuff I'm working for, all this wealth I'm accumulating, it's not just for me anymore, it's for my offspring.
Legacy. It's all about establishing that lineage.
Exactly. But here's the thing, up until this point, lineage was traced through the mother, right? We talked about mother, right?
That's right. But with this newfound understanding of paternity, men start to get a little, shall we say, controlling.
Because now they want to make sure that their hard-earned resources are going to their biological children, not just anyone's kids.
Bingo. And that, my friend, is where patriarchy starts to rear its head.
So basically, a way to control inheritance. That's pretty crafty if you think about it.
Well, crafty maybe, but not exactly what we call progressive these days.
Definitely not. But I'm curious, how did they even enforce this? Like, did they just start handing out paternity tests in the Stone Age?
Not quite. But they did come up with a system. Monogamy.
Okay, so like till death do us part and all that.
Well, not exactly. More like monogamy for women, free for all for men.
Ah, the classic double standard. Sounds about right.
Unfortunately, yeah. It was a system designed to guarantee paternity for men while keeping women firmly under control.
So women's roles become increasingly limited to the domestic sphere.
Exactly. They're expected to bear children, preferably male heirs, and manage the household, while men are out there, expanding the family fortune and potentially the family tree as they see fit.
Wow, talk about a raw deal for women. It's like their entire world just shrinks.
And Engels doesn't mince words about the impact of this shift. He actually calls it the world historic defeat of the female sex.
The world historic defeat. That's a pretty bold statement. But honestly, it's not hard to see why you'd say that.
Right. It's a pretty bleak picture, but keep in mind, this is just one perspective.
True. And speaking of perspectives, I know this Bettelvine learning video also touches on the views of radical feminists. They have a slightly different take on the origins of patriarchy, right?
They do. And their perspective adds another layer of complexity to this whole discussion.
All right, then let's dive into that. What do radical feminists have to say about how patriarchy came to be? All right, lay it on me. What's the radical feminist take on this whole patriarchy origin story?
So they're on the same page as Engels in that they see patriarchy as a social construct, not some kind of biological imperative.
Okay, so good.
But here's where they diverge. While Engels points to private property as the big turning point, radical feminists are like, nah, it goes deeper than that.
Deeper? You mean like some deep-seated animosity towards women?
In a way, yeah. They see the fundamental conflict as being between the sexes themselves.
Okay, I'm intrigued.
For them, patriarchy is all about men maintaining dominance and control over women, and they argue that this predates the whole private property thing.
So it's less about who's got the deed to the farm and more about this inherent power struggle between genders.
Exactly. They'd argue that while economics and control of resources definitely played a role in reinforcing patriarchy, the real root of the problem is this power dynamic between men and women.
So we've got Engels pointing at economics, radical feminists saying it's this deeper power struggle. It's like trying to solve a cosmic riddle. Where does this leave us? I mean, what are we supposed to do with all this information?
Well, I think the biggest takeaway is that patriarchy isn't some unchangeable law of nature.
Okay, that's a good starting point.
It's a system created and maintained by humans, which means it can be challenged and changed.
Music to my ears. But let's be real. This system has been around for ages. Where do we even begin to dismantle something so deeply ingrained?
It starts with awareness, with understanding how we got to this point.
So knowledge is power, even when we're talking about something as massive as patriarchy.
Absolutely. Once you see the historical roots, the economic factors, the power dynamics at play, you can start to recognize those patterns in our own lives and challenge them.
It makes you wonder, what would those early societies with mother right think of the world we live in today?
Right. Talk about a mind-blowing blast from the past. But hey, maybe by understanding how we got here, we can start writing a different story for the future.
Here's hoping. Now, for our listeners who are ready to go even deeper down this rabbit hole, what should they check out?
Well, this whole conversation was sparked by that awesome Beethoven learning video we mentioned.
Such a good one.
Definitely recommend checking out the full Origins of Patriarchy video over on their YouTube channel. It's eye-opening stuff.
Couldn't agree more. All right, folks, there you have it. A whirlwind tour of ancient societies, economic theories, and a little gender politics for good measure.
We covered a lot of ground.
We did. Just remember, understanding the past is key to creating a better future. So keep those brains buzzing and keep questioning everything. Until next time.